Hi, my name is Mark. I'm 50 years old and I'm divorced.
Hi Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can you tell us how long ago you got divorced?
I filed in June of 2003 and I signed my final resolution in December of 2006.
So you've been divorced for about 6 years.
Yeah, officially, it's not as though that ended the, let's call them negotiations, because we have three children, so there were custody and alimony and child support issues that weren't completely resolved until more recently, about a year ago.
We're one of the things we're doing is compiling our own statistics for all the people that we talk to. So one of the things that we want to know is how long the process took from filing until final resolution.
Well, June of 2003 to December of 2006, what's that, 3.5 years? 3.5 years. Felt like 10.
And did you retain counsel?
I retained counsel for the initial final resolution, and then when I went back last year regarding custody and child support, I represented myself.
So you had a separate custody discrepancy 5 years after your divorce was final?
Well, yeah, it was very contentious and remains contentious to this day, unfortunately for the kids. But yeah, I gave away my home, pretty much all of my money, and then I was put in a position to pay alimony and child support and got 50% custody. That was at the final resolution. And then after the final resolution, I found myself in a position where the children were living with me by choice, and I was paying child support to someone who was not supporting the children financially. So after a period of time elapsed, I went back to court and filed papers to suggest that I would no longer be paying child support. There was no reaction to that subsequently by my ex for about 4 or 5 months, and then by the time we got to court to resolve that issue, a whole year had gone by. So it was a fairly complicated issue, but all in all, April of last year, April of 2011, I came out of the courtroom. I was forgiven all child support in arrears, forgiven all alimony in arrears, and given full custody of my children, and am supposed to be receiving child support, which I have yet to receive. So when you say, when's it over, when was it over, because there are kids involved, it probably will never entirely be over, but that's the timeline.
So you retained counsel for the original divorce proceedings, but not for your custody?
Correct. Yeah, I interviewed a bunch of attorneys, and I found someone who was purported to be the best in this local area. And but when I went back, I chose not to retain counsel. Number one, because I couldn't afford it, and number two, I just felt like I'd received such an education in this that I could do it myself. And I had the ability as my own attorney to ask questions directly. I had the ability to speak, which I just did not like the fact that I couldn't speak in the original. But it was mostly a monetary decision that ended up being fortuitous for me.
And do you have any idea over that 3.5 years what you paid in attorney's fees?
You know, I've been asked that question a million times because it wasn't just attorneys. We had a guardian, we had a psychological evaluator, we had multiple psychologists, quote unquote marriage counseling. I was given direction to see a psychologist, and there were other fees associated with some of the things because of the kids and because it was so contentious. I would estimate multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow. How many other legal professionals were involved? I mean, you mentioned a guardian, you mentioned counselors. How many people were in your pockets during that experience?
Well, again, my attorney, her attorney, she went through 5 different attorneys during the course of it.
Jeez.
But I didn't have to pay any of her attorney's fees, so I guess that wouldn't count. The guardian, who was an attorney, psychological evaluator, the marriage counseling, the private counseling, her forensic accountant, my forensic accountant. So how many is that?
5 or 6.
5 or 6, 6 or 7.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That's amazing. If you were ever in this situation again, would you hire the same attorney?
Absolutely not.
No, why not?
You know, some of this was my fault. He was a bright guy and he knew domestic law, but I think much like some of the judges that were involved, he'd been doing it so long, he didn't care anymore. You know, he felt like he was giving me good advice, but he was so jaded to the whole thing that he didn't take a personal stake in it. And maybe he shouldn't take a personal stake in it. Maybe if the divorce attorneys took a personal stake in stuff, they'd go crazy and not be able to perform their job. But he didn't care. I mean, he allowed things to happen that in hindsight should never have happened. And I was so emotional during the whole thing that I didn't bring to the party the normally objective, rational opinions that I would, in business or in dealing with my children and their teachers, or something outside the bounds of this kind of nastiness.
Who filed originally, you or her?
I did. I filed originally because the situation at home was just completely untenable, and those are stories I suppose I can share later on. But I filed the morning that I filed. I was escorted out of my house that evening by the local police department because she returned and filed a domestic violence injunction that was completely fabricated in reaction to my filing, which, in my mind kind of justified that I did the right thing.
No doubt. So, Mark, at some point, and this is a question that I think we should probably ask anyone. This is a person that at some point you enjoyed their company and cared about enough to get married in the first place. So what was the transition? What went wrong? How did you end up where you ended up?
Why did I get divorced?
Yeah.
Well, I wish that were a more black and white answer, but again, having the benefit of hindsight now, and I strung this thing out for a long time, and what I mean by stringing it out for a long time is I was ready to do this probably at least a year or two before I did it, and I hung in there for a couple more years because I wanted the ability to look back and say I did everything I could possibly do to make it work, and I feel very comfortable that I did that. I don't have any regrets. Maybe the only regret I have is I probably should have done it sooner, because it was really about the kids. It was really about, do I want the children growing up in an environment where there's contention and arguments and yelling and profanity and integrity issues and inconsistency? What happened over the last year was I would come home on a Friday from work and there would be no one home, and there would be no note, and no one would answer their cell phone. So my children were gone, unbeknownst to me. And Sunday, they would all come back, or 2 or 3 of the kids would walk through the front door and hug me, or one of the kids would come through the front door and hug me, and the rest of them would drive away, and I didn't know where they were, and there was no explanation. Those types of things continued to go on, and then there was...
Well, and that's not out of the blue either, right? I mean, it's not like just one day she
no, it's the
disappeared.
whole... Well, it's the whole what happened. A bunch of stuff, but it was a progressively deteriorating environment for everyone, and I was not violent, I was not abusive, I wasn't doing drugs or abusing alcohol, I was working my ass off, I was what I considered to be a good dad, a great dad, and a good husband. There was no infidelity, at least on my part. I don't think there was on her part. So it was a progressively deteriorating environment. And one day, after these types of things continued, and she independent of the children, would just disappear for days at a time and not feel as though she owed me any obligation or expectation or whatever. But one day, we had been in a routine with the kids for years. I took my eldest daughter to a private school early. She was in 9th grade at the time. And I came home, and for the last year, when I came home, the 2 younger children were dressed and ready to go to their private school. They both went to the same school. And then I would take them to school and go off to work. And it was a Monday, and I had a sales meeting at 9 o'clock that had been a standing, recurring sales meeting for a long, long time. So it was a routine. And when I came home for the 2 little ones that particular day, they weren't ready to go to school, and she was on her way out the door. And I said, how come they're not ready? And she said, I have to meet someone, you have to get them ready. And I said, I've got a meeting at 9 o'clock that you've been aware of for months. What do you mean? Who are you meeting with? And she looked at me right in front of the 2 kids and said, none of your fucking business. And I said, give me the credit card and the key. I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm not doing this anymore. And I can't remember if I got the credit card or the key, but I walked out the door, and I never, I'm going to say I never went back in. I can't remember what transpired between then and the actual filing, but I want to say that I filed the following day, but it was shortly thereafter. And I did go back because I was escorted out of the house the day I filed, after she filed the domestic violence injunction. But that was the official day that I initiated things. I don't recall the logistics of between walking out the door that day with her screaming at me and when I filed, but I want to say it was a couple of days,
Mark, that sounds interesting. Tell us about that.
So there's a process involved when you file for divorce. The other party needs to be served. And if you don't know anything about service, that person has to be handed documents face to face acknowledging who they are. And the process server, who's typically, in my case, it was a private detective, a retired police officer that was a process server. And he went to my house and called me on my cell phone. And my ex-wife, part of the challenge with her was she's very bright. Unfortunately, she used that intelligence the wrong way. But in this particular case, she knew what was going on. So she didn't answer the door. And the guy called me on my cell phone and said, what do you want me to do? And I said, I don't know. What do you do? And he goes, well, I can just keep knocking on the door. And then he goes, oh, wait a minute, the door's opening. And I'm on the phone with the guy, and I'm like, he's asking me what to do. I've never done this before, And he says, well, your daughter's answered the door. Not over yet, I guess, huh? So he asked me, do you want me to give them to her? Sorry.
No, it's fine.
And I said, at this point, do you have to tell her what it is? And he said, no. I said, if you give that to her and tell her to just put it on the front table for her mother, does that satisfy the law around being served? And he said, yes. And I said, well, then I guess that's what you do, because there's no sense in putting everybody through this again, going back again, whatever. This needs to be done. And so that's what he did. He gave the papers to my eldest daughter and said, we've accomplished the service. And I thanked him, and we hung up. And I was at I had a business convention to go to down at the convention center. And I went to the convention, and I came home that night. And I think it was about 7 or 8 o'clock. It was dark. And I walked into my house, and nobody was home. And so I grabbed a beer out of the fridge. I took off my suit jacket. I went into my den, and I sat down, and I turned on there were two police officers standing there, and they said, "Are you so and so? You know, Mark such and such?" And I said, "Yeah, that's me." And they said, "We're gonna have to ask you to leave your house." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And they said, "Well, your ex-wife has filed a domestic violence injunction against you." And I said, "What does that mean?" And I took the paperwork from the policeman, and they said, "Well, it means that you have to leave the house. We have to escort you out of here, and you'll have a trial date set at some point in the future. And until then, you can't come within 500 feet of your home, your ex-wife, or your children, and you can't communicate with them either." And I thought, boy, let the fun begin. They felt guilty. You could tell that she was out in the street, parked there, watching this whole thing take place, because that's kind of, I guess that turns her on or something. But these guys were clearly, and most of the policemen that I interfaced with over the course of the next couple of years, because she filed 3 of these over the course of the next few years.
Wow.
Knowing that the consequences were that I would not be able to talk to my kids. All of it was false. These guys knew it, I knew it, she knew it, but when a woman files a domestic violence injunction, and you know, I got daughters, so rightfully so, right? They need to be protected. What if I was a criminal? What if I, beat the shit out of her? Or whatever? How do these guys know? But they could tell based on the way I handled the situation. And one guy even said, "Well, let me call my not the boss. What do you call the boss of the policeman? The sheriff or sergeant or whatever," and said, "Let me just call him and see if there's any recourse." And he got on the phone. He came back and goes, "I'm really sorry, dude. But you gotta leave." And I said, "Well, can I get some stuff?" And they said, "Well, we have to go with you." So I walked up into my bedroom and I grabbed some clothes, and I can't remember what else I took. It was, what do you do in that situation, right? I got 15 years of stuff in $1 million home with 3 kids, and I think I got some pants and some underwear and some t-shirts and threw them in a trash bag. And
you at that point didn't know how long that was going to take either, right? I mean, there was no court date set, so
you don't process it at that point. It's a brand new experience. It's completely out of the blue. It's completely beyond your realm of capacity. It's difficult to describe. Quite frankly, I don't even remember if I called a friend and spent the night at a friend's house, or I just went and grabbed a hotel room. But I know I grabbed a bottle of scotch, and I didn't know what to do. So the rest of the night was a bit of a fog for a variety of reasons, the scotch being one of them. But my world exploded at that point. That was my first day in. Seems like yesterday when I start talking about it.
Wow. You talked a little bit about this, but are you paying alimony or child support now?
No, I'm actually due child support in arrears. And I'm actually going back into court in a few weeks because the state of Florida Department of Revenue has escalated the circumstances because I haven't been getting paid. And we're going to court, and I'll be representing myself, and the state of Florida is suing my ex for proof that she either does not have the ability to pay or has the ability to pay, and there are circumstances suggesting why she can't. Or the document I received says they will be incarcerating her unless she can prove the case. So we're not done yet.
Wow. Knowing what you know now about the process, what would you have done differently? Start to finish, not just...
There's part of me that wants to say everything. It's not really fair to be able to go back knowing what I know now, and God forbid I will ever have to go back and do this again. But everything. Would I not retain counsel right out of the gate? That's a very, very... I've asked myself that question a number of times. And because I had success the second time around, I might represent myself. But if you think about it, I would be going back into a situation where I can't go back and have the same knowledge then that I have now. So I probably would retain counsel, but I would treat counsel very, very differently. I do a lot more of my own work. I do a lot more homework. when I sat with my attorney or gave tasks to my attorney, they would be either partially or almost completely completed, and I would just look for signatures, and a lot less babbling emotionally, because the emotional babble costs you a couple $100 an hour, you know. I would exercise more influence on the strategy and probably figure out a way to do some talking in the courtroom, as long as I don't know if that's with an attorney present. Perhaps I wouldn't be allowed to speak, which again was one of the more frustrating things. But it's unbelievable how much I know now that I would do differently.
Mark, I know a little bit about your personal life and your family, but talk to us a little bit about what kind of support you had while you were going through the initial filing and divorce proceedings process.
Well, I can't imagine anybody would have a better support infrastructure. My family, I'm all very close to. My kids were fabulous. My friends, the parents of my children's friends, the teachers, the coaches, to a person, everybody was just fabulous. I can't imagine going through it without that support network. It just wouldn't have been possible. You know, it's just such a dark place, as you know. It's just such a dark place that, you know, I can't imagine going through it without the support network that I had. And I taxed all of my relationships, you know, emotionally, and everybody came through with flying colors. You know, that's the upside to the story.
And you lost your house.
I did.
You sold the business that you were involved in at the time.
Yeah, I mean, when you asked earlier about the costs, I think the opportunity costs, the impact on the business. I was in business with two of my best friends, and those friendships are still intact, which is a testament to them. Yeah, I think the opportunity costs were in the millions. You know, if you take the house was $1 million home, the company was sold for a few $1 million, and if we kept it and run it efficiently without all that distraction, we probably could have got 2 or 3 times the amount of money we got for the company. So, you know, I think with the real estate and the assets and the fees and the lost opportunity, multiple millions of dollars for sure. You know.
What would be the one piece of advice you would give to somebody if a friend came to you and said, Mark, I'm thinking about getting divorced?
Well, you know, again, one piece of advice, you know, it's difficult to say what one piece of advice. There's an awful lot of information that is accessible to you about the process and the laws. And of course, I got divorced in the state of Florida, so if you're getting divorced in a different state, there are probably nuances difference to those state laws. But I did literally no homework. I interviewed a few attorneys. I picked the one that I felt the most comfortable with at that stage, and I gave the entire responsibility to him. Of course, at that time I had a lot of money too, so it wasn't as...
Seemed like the right thing to do.
Well, it wasn't as sensitive an issue. The economics were not a concern of mine. I had no idea how long and drawn out and expensive it was going to be. So I would say do your homework, but I would also say find someone like me who's been through it before under similar circumstances. You know, do you have kids? Do you not have kids? How long you were married? What state? So on and so forth. So before I walked into my attorney's office for the first time, I had a much clearer understanding of what I might be getting myself into. You know.
Well, Mark, thanks a lot for your time and your candor. This is, for those of you watching, this is going to be the first in a series of interviews we're going to conduct. Mark's going to interview me, and we're going to begin to interview some of our friends who have been divorced. And hopefully, if nothing else, this series of personal stories and interviews will show you that you're not by yourself, whether you're about to go through a divorce or in the middle of it or coming through the other side. There are other people who've been through this exact same experience. Do you have any other closing thoughts, Mark?
No, I think it's just that. I mean, it's an emotional experience. As you can tell, to this day, there are certain parts of the story I can't tell without getting choked up. But I can't imagine that people out there that are contemplating this or in the middle of it or just having gone through it won't benefit from some of these stories. It's one of the reasons that we're so passionate about doing it. It's just clearly going to be helpful. So, and you know, I'd love to hear feedback. You know, when Steve said you'll be, you know, people have gone exactly through what you're going through. It. Nobody's going to go exactly through what you're going through. It's just so personal. But I think you'll get some perspective from a variety of different opinions, and I just have to believe it'll be helpful. So I hope you enjoyed this, and you know, have a great day.